Well, welcome everyone to the July episode of the bi-monthly FRPanorama webinar series. I'm Larry Liberti, and together with my colleague Mario Alanis, we will be hosting today's seminar. Welcome. What a pleasure to see you all today. In fact, you are one of almost 300 registrants to today's seminar, and you represent more than 20 companies, 20 regulatory agencies, and more than a dozen NGOs, patient trade associations, and universities from all over the world, from Asia, Europe, North America, Latin America, and Africa. Thanks very much for joining us. This webinar series was created to help stakeholders gain a practical understanding around how to implement and refine or just consider the use of Reliance pathways. FRPanorama is an educational program of the Erudit Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization which is the sponsor of the FRPath project. We are also very grateful for the ongoing support provided by MSD for the FRPanorama series. And as always, we're indebted to our advisory committee for their input and guidance regarding the topics and the speakers. It's our hope that by participating in these webinars, you'll get practical advice. That's important, practical advice to address your questions about Reliance and to think more about the role and benefits of regulatory reliance. It's an interesting topic. We've been getting great response to these. And in fact, this is the fourth in our ongoing webinar series. And we know that you now have a good understanding of the concept of reliance and that you're here to learn more about the practical aspects of how to get the most value out of the use of reliance. Well, we all want to work to ensure that we're getting the most from regulatory reliance-based pathways. So today, we're going to focus on how to implement simple steps to optimize the use of reliance pathways. In prior webinars, now all our webinars are archived on the frpath.org website. In these prior webinars, we did deep dives to explore what are the fundamental steps that can be implemented and can ensure consistent and transparent use of regulatory pathways. So in this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 practical ways to be sure that these pathways are being used effectively by companies and agencies through good communication and the use of good solid evidence. Before I introduce today's distinguished presenters, let me introduce you to my colleague, Mario Alanis. Mario.
Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And that's a great introduction, Larry. We are fortunate today to have a wonderful group of colleagues who are here to share their experiences with ways to optimize the use of Reliance. I know sometimes it is difficult to determine what are the simplest next steps that an organization wants to follow to be sure that they are getting the most from their use of Reliance. But today, I am sure that our audience will walk away with practical ways to move the Reliance dial. So, Larry, let's get started.
Okay, here we go. Thanks, Mario. Today's session will last 1 hour and 15 minutes. We hope you'll find it to be an excellent use of your time. So please feel free to suggest questions for our speakers in the chat box, and we'll do our best to monitor this and to pose these to our guests during the panel session. As we mentioned, today we're going to look at 3 approaches to optimizing the use of Reliance. We're going to be looking at developing SOPs and Reliance programs and training. We're going to look at public assessment reports from reference agencies, and we're going to be looking at agency industry communications. So I'm very pleased to introduce our first guest, Dr. Asmaa Fouad. Dr. Fouad is the General Manager of Biological Products in the General Directorate of the Egyptian Drug Authority. Among her many responsibilities, she serves as her agency's delegate to ICH, IPRP, and is a member of the Expert Advisory Panel in Biologics Standardization at the WHO. The Egyptian Drug Authority has put considerable effort into optimizing its regulatory efficiency and effectiveness using Reliance processes. To do so, The agency has undertaken several initiatives to educate its staff on the processes and benefits of Reliance. So today, Dr. Asmaa will show and share with us some of her experiences related to Reliance at the EDA. She will discuss the importance of communications and training. And so over to you, Dr. Asmaa.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Larry, and hello, Mario. Thank you very much for this introduction. And of course, thank you. Big thanks for FRPanorama for hosting this podcast and for inviting me to give some insights on the EDA practice in the proper and the appropriate use of Reliance, or what so-called the good Reliance practice as a tool for smarter regulations. I will give you a brief presentation, few slides on where we stand and what is our future perspective in the Reliance practice. And here we go with the first slide. Yes. The framework for good Reliance in EDA briefly, and according to the good Reliance practice guideline of WHO, consists mainly of these four pillars: the legal provision, as we already updated many of our existing legal mandates, the product included, like what are the inclusion criteria and what are the exclusion criteria, and how we practice, what is the best practice to be addressed in this criteria. Also, what are the required data for effective and efficient Reliance practice. And the main challenge, of course, was the assessors and the process itself, the assessor culture shift, and the clear process to be in place. The journey of EDA Egypt and Reliance started back in 2015, even before the establishment of EDA, as a step of waiving from the inspection of products pre-qualified by WHO or imported from stringent regulatory authority. Then we went one step ahead in 2018, in 2016 to 2018, with the recognition of EMA and FDA assessment for imported products through a ministerial decree for marketing authorization of both small and large molecules. Then came the EDA establishment in 2020 with the COVID, and we updated all the ministerial decrees and the regulations of EDA in regards to marketing authorization and, of course, for the use of Reliance. So in 2021, more proper Reliance concept after the WHO visit in September 2020, and we started by drafting Reliance pathways for marketing authorization. Then in 2022, we issued the final regulations for Reliance pathways guideline. Then as we used to do, we have these regulations in phases, started by public consultation and engagement with industry to have feedback and to have comments on this guideline. Then we put the guideline for piloting for 8 months, and then we started the implementation phase in July, one year exactly from July 2022 till now. And we have a commitment to extend the Reliance to the post-approval changes of the CMC and for other areas and for other regulatory areas. When it comes to numbers, we have the old approach of Reliance. We have registered 136 pharmaceutical products, small molecules, and 47 large molecules. And for the new regulations, we have 2 levels of Reliance. The first level we have registered 16 products, and for the second level we have registered 5 products, and under registration we have 14 products for first level and 5 products for the second level. Don't worry about the difference between the 2 levels, but as a whole the Reliance approach is going up, and the submission through the Reliance pathway is getting much improved by time. In other regulatory areas, as I told you, we don't limit the use of Reliance in the marketing authorization only. We extend this for the lot release and the lab testing function for biological products. That's where I'm coming from. So let me tell you that we have reduced the timeline for the vaccine batch release and for the plasma-derived medicinal products. all products, biological products that require lot release process and require lab testing, we have extended the Reliance approach to such regulatory functions. Also, the regulatory inspection since 2015, and we are going during this quarter 3 of 2023, we are going to issue the Reliance pathway for the post-approval changes that makes much more faster market access to the patient after registration, of course. So the take-home message from EDA experience during that year, or actually the few last years, Reliance is a tool for capacity building to achieve the win-win-win goal. The 3-win approaches for both patients, for authorities to save the resources and to reallocate the resources into their proper placement, and of course for the industry to have the quick market access and to save the time consumed in the evaluation, in the complete evaluation without Reliance. The next message is the Reliance models are tailored one, because no one size fits all. Every agency has its own needs and its own challenges and its own resources. Of course, we all agree on the existence of much resources constraints. We have resources constraints. We have to reallocate resources. We have to maximize the benefits of the available resources. And of course, after COVID, we have to practice Reliance properly, and we have to benefit from, this is the third message, the regulatory convergence and harmonization are keywords. These are the huge messages and the huge lessons we learned from our last year activity, or 18 months activities in ICH and IPRP. When we come in one table during the assembly and during the working groups, and we have our people in the expert working groups for the establishment or the updates of the most widely used and recognized guidelines of ICH. So we can rely much more in the proper way of Reliance, not a Reliance that is not an evidence. I mean, we can rely with an evidence-based Reliance. We can build our assessors' capacity, and we can use our resources properly. So that's it for my views and from the insights I want to give you from EDA perspective for the Reliance practice. Actually, you mentioned, Larry, about the training, the impact of the efficient training and the SOPs for such a scope. As for SOPs, as I showed you, that we have already what's much stronger than SOP. We have legal provision, we have ministerial decrees, and we have regulations that are binding to both the assessor, both the regulator and the industry. So we have much more than SOP for this area. We have also a training, the efficient training. We have training from the Pharma Association, from the industry, and we have, of course, a training from the ICH annually on the ICH guideline that make better understanding of the international standardization and also promote for the regulatory convergence and harmonization. So impact of training is obviously during the last years and during the last 2 years actually is very important to our regulators' capacity building, either in different scope or different aspects of training program, either with the collaboration with industry or with ICH. So I hope this makes our vision clear and our future perspective also clear. And over to you, open for any question from you or from our dear audience. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asmaa. Boy, you're doing so much at the agency, and you put a lot of emphasis on this concept of reliance. We have many regulators are participating in today's session, and I think often they're challenged to try to understand how to bring the concept of reliance to their reviewers. In other words, within your agency, is every reviewer given the opportunity to work on a product that might benefit from Reliance? Or do you have certain reviewers who are more specialists in Reliance? How do you go about deciding how Reliance is actually used inside your reviewing staff?
Actually, we have, as all the agencies, we are facing these human resource challenges. And as you all know, regulatory sciences are only educate. We only know regulatory science in the agency, so we have limited numbers. As I believe this is a common challenge among all authorities. We have limited numbers of reviewers and regulators, and we are highly investing on them. So we don't have a specific team for practicing the Reliance review. We are investing in all our regulators and reviewers to get them all with good and better understanding day by day in Reliance approach, and how they can rely or with an evidence-based reliance on other authorities. We engage those assessors to the expert working groups of the ICH, and we have already our people in many guidelines in ICH. And even we have one expert, for example, in the expert work group, we have an internal task force to extend the knowledge. And with this extension of the knowledge, there is an extension of the Reliance approach on how EMA, FDA, Anvisa, Saudi FDA, all the authorities are talking together in such working groups. So that builds more confidence in the assessment reports and the Reliance documents, and even the files that is submitted to the agency, and in the products as well. So we depend on the whole team of regulators. We don't have an assigned or dedicated team for Reliance. We are trying to educate them all and train them all. We are trying to extend the knowledge to all the team. They are limited because we have limited human resources as regulators. We hope that academia start to educate the undergraduates with the curriculum of regulatory sciences. So it helps. I'm sure it will help in the regulatory field. So we are using all our reviewers and our regulators, and we are educating them all in how to practice a proper Reliance.
It's a wonderful use of manpower, and I applaud the way that you've approached this. Mario, do you have any thoughts or any ideas?
Well, I just think it's fascinating all that has been done. I think we could stay for a long time. There are particular aspects that, to me, that were very relevant and seem to be difficult. On one hand, the cultural shift, which, as we have, it's so difficult, and that I think that is related to the implementation of the pilot phase. Agencies sometimes feel that too concerned about taking the decision because they're it's not easy for them to be allowed to do a pilot phase, because it's all based on a resolution, and if there is no, so I think that's although they might want to do it, sometimes it might not be that easy for them to be allowed officially to do these pilot phases. But it's very good, and maybe later on we can continue discussing these topics. But yes, it's great.
I just wanted to say that you brought up a really interesting point, which leads in very nicely to what Mario is going to talk about, and that has to do with, what are the required data to make a good Reliance decision? And our next speaker is going to be talking a little bit about one approach to looking at data and information that can be used to support Reliance decisions. So Mario, over to you.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, indeed, and I think it's links very well. I think the presentations. It is my honor to introduce to you my very dear colleague, Dr. Magda Bujar, who is well known to many of us involved in global regulatory benchmarking and regulatory system strengthening. Magda, in her role as Senior Manager for Regulatory Program and Strategic Partnerships at CIRS, the Center for Innovation and Regulatory Science, investigates and coordinates research on how regulatory processes affect medicine availability. Her recent research, one of her recent research has focused on how publicly available information, particularly public assessment reports on PARS from reference agencies, can facilitate a Reliance decision. Magda, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Larry, for Mario, apologies. And I sometimes call you Mary.
Yes,
So
yes, I know.
thank you so much both for this introduction and the invitation. And good morning, good afternoon to you all. So perhaps we can pull up my slides if that's okay. Thank you. So Mario is absolutely right. So if we could just should be able to advance. In my presentation, I will be covering three topics. As Mario has mentioned, the use of assessment reports, especially public assessment reports, as tools for Reliance. What are some of the current challenges and solutions, but also future opportunities and recommendations to make sure that these documents can indeed be used to support Reliance? So this is just an introduction slide. I think we are all here perhaps aware already of what Reliance is, so I'm not going to rehash the definition from WHO, but I think it's very, very helpful to have this definition of what Reliance is. And I think there's already a lot of case studies and examples of how Reliance can enable faster patient access. It can help with better resource allocation. It can be an educational tool for reviewers, but also help enable faster approval times. And that can be, for example, through reduction of backlogs. And on the right-hand side, I have a case study from South Africa that we have recently undertaken work with the agency, and CIRS has been working with South Africa for a number of years to help understand how can this backlog be reduced. And the agency, in fact, implemented Reliance to help really roll out the use of this route for new chemical entities and generics. And it was shown that through the use of Reliance, the approval was 68% quicker. So I think a nice statistic to show, I think, for example, to senior management to help with this cultural shift that Dr. Asmaa was talking about. But ultimately, I think ICH was mentioned, and I think what we're aiming towards is having better trust across regulators and convergence and harmonization of these various approaches. So how can Reliance be achieved? From the point of view of documentation, there are two key documents that I think all organizations looking to implement Reliance should be looking at. First of all, WHO Good Reliance Practices, which recommend really that that the national regulatory authorities seeking to implement Reliance should look at public assessment reports as a primary source really of documenting regulatory decisions. But of course, in some cases, and I'll touch on this, public assessment reports may not be available, in which case the manufacturer perhaps should be providing assessment reports, and these can be requested by the relying agency. The second document, which came out just recently and has been finalized, is an IPRP document with question and answer on Reliance, which again notes that every Reliance model cannot be successful without the use of documentation and assessment reports. So again, these are seen as key to help implement this important concept. So the work of CIRS, this is something that I'll be describing in a number of slides. One key output has been a survey which we undertook just a couple of years ago last year, really looking at some of the challenges and opportunities for Reliance. So we've asked a number of questions and received responses from 29 agencies globally. And one of them has been, what has been the key challenge that agencies face in utilizing Reliance? And perhaps not a surprise, the top response has been the access to assessment reports, which are really the cornerstone of being able to undertake a Reliance review. In addition, we also asked the agencies which reference agencies they use and do they face challenges in accessing the assessment reports. And we can see that most agencies utilize WHO as well as EMA and FDA. And then other regulators. And I think this list, if anything, is growing, that as agencies are reaching maturity level and also are being listed as WHO listed authorities, that this becomes more and more important. But what we can also see in the other bar, the orange bar, is also responses from authorities saying that they are facing challenges in accessing the assessment reports from those agencies. So that really shows that there is still some work to be done in this area. So perhaps all of you are already aware, but just to clarify what public assessment reports are, these are documents that are available on agency websites. They outline really how the agency assessed the submission from a company to authorize a medicine. So they look at really both how the company submission has been analyzed by the agency, but also how the decision on the benefit-risk balance was made. And this is something that's really key, not just to healthcare professionals, industry, and patients, but also to other authorities increasingly. When we look at PARs, and I'll show some examples in the next slide, they include a core set of regulatory documents which are published. This is primarily for new authorizations, but a number of agencies also publishes assessment reports on major line extensions, for example. But I think what is important to note, and I think that's where the challenge is that some of the information which is considered as confidential is removed from the from this report that's published. So these reports are in fact redacted. So this is just a snapshot of some of the key public assessment reports. And this is something, again, within CIRS we love to look at because it contains really a wealth of information, as I've mentioned, on the assessment, some of the major milestones that really outline how long it takes for the medicine to be approved. And as I've mentioned, increasingly more and more agencies that are publishing it. I think Swissmedic from this list is one of the agencies that has most recently started to publish these reports, but we are also seeing that agencies all around the world, for example, Brazil and Japan also are doing this, and we know other agencies are looking to start publishing assessment reports such as South Africa. So as I've mentioned, we do love to look at these public assessment reports, and we undertook a study a couple of years ago to understand this really key question, I think, that many agencies face. And it is to do with trying to understand why there may be divergences in decision making. So if I were an agency and I had to approve a medicine that was approved both by EMA and FDA, but each agency came to a different decision based on well, really to do with the indication, can I understand why a different decision was made? So we undertook a research project to try and analyze, is it possible to understand decision making on an indication from these public assessment reports from these two major agencies? And although we found that in general this information is published very clearly, there were some inconsistencies exactly in where and how this information was published. And in some cases, we were unable to really identify why a different decision was made on the same submission package. So again, a recommendation here is perhaps looking at a more standardized approach to communication of benefit risk. And perhaps not just benefit risk, it's just generally in public assessment reports. A workshop that was undertaken by CIRS in 2019 looked at whether public assessment reports are good knowledge management tools for other stakeholders to understand an agency's decision making, and whether there could be improvements. And the group from this workshop, which was composed of agencies and companies, agreed that regulatory agencies do not always clearly articulate how decisions are made, and particularly around the areas of uncertainty. And the fact that the details exactly on the benefit risk balance could be considered more clearly, as well as principles of quality decision making. So 3 key recommendations were made. First of all, to support a common template and have a harmonized executive summary, at least, of a public assessment report. So really, if you do have a chance to look at the public assessment reports from the agencies, you will notice that each is very slightly different, or in some cases very, very different. It could range from EMA having one consolidated document compared to FDA having a number of different documents. So this can be a challenge to agencies looking to analyze. So is there an opportunity to standardize what a public assessment report looks like across agencies? And is this perhaps something that an organization like ICH or another could consider to at least standardize the headings and the information that is provided in the public assessment reports? And as I've mentioned, I think the key question is, can public assessment reports actually help with reliance? So Mario has alluded to this, and this is a study that is currently ongoing within CIRS to try and appraise public assessment reports as tools to guide regulatory decision-making by health agencies that use this documentation for reliance purposes, both for new active substances and major line extensions. So what we are doing in this study, and it's actually currently being written up, is we have compared public assessment reports for 6 medicines for those agencies that publish a public assessment report, so the ones I have shown you, and trying to compare this to what I would say a generic list of information of what agencies require to undertake reliance, because again, I think that differs. Every agency may have slightly different requirements for reliance, but in general, is that information contained in those public assessment reports. So do look out for a publication and a report later in the year, but perhaps what I can share at the moment, the answer I think is it depends. So, and to a certain extent that, yes, these public assessment reports have important information to undertake reliance, but there are some limitations, particularly in the CMC area. This topic of documentation and information sharing to enable reliance was also a topic of a pre-conference workshop organized by DIA Europe. This has now been also written up as a report, so I would recommend for you all to have a look at. And a number of recommendations also were produced by the group. First of all, asking what information cannot be obtained from public domain or public assessment reports. Again, we're hoping to have an answer to that based on our study. But based on the discussions from the group, it was already said that the list of Q&As from agencies and the answers from companies are missing, as well as I've mentioned, full information on CMC. Why agencies need this information, and I think that ties in beautifully with the workshop we've had. It's really about understanding the decision-making process, which I think even an agency undertaking reliance, it's their decision to then approve that product. So it's a sovereign decision of an agency. So they really do, I think, if they are undertaking an abridged review, need to understand the decision-making process, or perhaps to be able to verify some information and data in the dossier as they undertake the review, or in case there are issues in the future, but also importantly to gain experience, because I think this is an opportunity for regulators globally to build capacity in their review, even if the review that they are undertaking is an abridged review. So a number of barriers were also discussed, and I think this is something that Dr. Asmaa also touched on, the fact that, of course, there are guidelines and laws that support reliance, but these are different across countries. So again, that poses a problem. I think the resource of the regulators to share this information, and I think also knowing exactly who should be sharing it and how. I think lack of definition of what unredacted assessment reports are, and this is something that I will touch on just very shortly, and then lack of different MOUs and confidentiality agreements with regulators. Companies also are challenged exactly knowing what to submit. So whether or not they need to, well, what exactly is the full clinical data means. And there are also challenges, of course, with regards to language, as assessment reports may be written in English, but of course that is not the language that everyone may be familiar with around the world. And finally, intellectual property. So a number of solutions were also suggested, and those are in the slide here. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but the key one I think here is something that Priti will also touch on, having better communication with agencies, across agencies, but also with industry. And perhaps the idea of establishing a public library of assessment reports, and that may then help with the sharing of information between different organizations. So the final recommendations from the group and some next steps for further research are listed on this slide. And one of the key, I think, recommendation here, and something that CIRS has started to work on, is this clarification on terminology on assessment reports. So just wanted to finish with this final slide here. And again, this is a study that is currently ongoing within CIRS. Some of you may be involved with. It's to really understand the perception on the provision of unredacted risk assessment reports. I think this term is used quite a lot, but it means different things to different regulators. So I think it's really understanding what exactly is being requested in addition to the public documents, and then is there a way to have clear definitions on what is public versus non-public and what is redacted versus unredacted. And hopefully, again, that will enable us to support Reliance decision-making and inform external advocacy on this topic. Because I think these findings are important both for those agencies looking to do Reliance, but also those agencies that are seen as reference agencies. I think many agencies that are used as reference agencies may not even know that they are being relied on. And as I've said, the key question is if they are in fact being used as reference agencies, is there an opportunity to have them output more information into the public domain, or sharing information directly with agencies to enable Reliance. So the approach that we are undertaking through the study, currently we are running a survey of industry to understand exactly what types of non-public information is being requested by agencies. And we will then follow this with a study of regulators to really understand exactly why non-public information is required and how it's being used in decision-making. So a couple of final takeaways. First of all, for relying agencies, I think this is a really, important resource, public assessment reports. And I would really encourage you to take a look at those. I think they are very, very fascinating to understand, as I've said, why a decision was made on the product. So a lot of interesting information in those resources. And as I mentioned, for reference agencies, I think recognizing that perhaps public assessment reports may not be perfect, and is there an opportunity for those agencies to perhaps improve what information is currently being included in those documents. So this is, and I don't know if those slides will be shared later, but just a snapshot of the different data sources where you can find public assessment reports from the agencies. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you once again for listening, and back to you, Larry. and Mary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, Magda. That was a tour de force, as we say. Very, very interesting. Um, I think there's just a couple of questions. We had a number of questions have come in. We can talk about them during the panel discussion, because I think I'd like to get a broader conversation around some of this. But one of the things that I kind of remember about public assessment reports, because if you go back a long time, those reports were not created to serve as a document for Reliance. And today we've kind of flipped the scenario and said, we have public assessment reports and we should be using them for Reliance. And I know you started talking about this, but in your final recommendation there, you said we have to recognize that there isn't always this ability to answer all the questions, right? And public assessment reports are not perfect. But do you think that they should become the de facto document that could be a go-to document for Reliance? Is that the way the world is moving?
My personal opinion would be yes. I think that these documents are absolutely key, and I think again, going with WHO recommendation, they should become the cornerstone of the decision making. There may be additional aspects on the decision making process that are not so clear from public assessment reports, and perhaps there are other opportunities, as I've said, to share information or to have, as I've said, a repository of additional information outside of the public data that is in the somewhere in the cloud or something like that organizations can share with each other. But I think you're absolutely right. Those documents were not initially created to enable Reliance. And I think it's really interesting that certain regulators have started to get feedback on their assessment reports. For example, Swissmedic, which has been one of the agencies that recently started to publish assessment reports, undertook such a study to ask stakeholders whether these assessment reports are appropriate. But I'm not sure if other agencies were asked that question. I think it was more aimed at patients, clinicians, and industry. So is there an opportunity to ask relying agencies, are these assessment reports appropriate? And I think once they evolve, I think absolutely you're right. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think they should
Well,
become
I
the
do.
documents. Thank you.
And Mario, what's your opinion around these?
Well, I think it's fascinating, and I was just thinking that this standardization can help, for example, with the topic of sameness. That, well, if the industry and regulators come up with what it's, how do I can certify that two products are the same, or the product produced under slightly different circumstances is the same, well, maybe the part could include that discussion, and that would save, I don't know, what do you think, Magda? I think it's fascinating, all of what you have found, and certainly communication is very important. Well, the thing of the public library, I think that is also fast. So I don't know, I think there are so many ideas that you mentioned, and I was well, I guess I was thinking of this sameness issue, that it's so much part of the discussion.
That's great. Well, let's continue the excitement here. Thank you, Magda. Just to say, this is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the FRPath website. Usually takes us about a week to get it all in shape. And some of you have asked with regard to references. I know Magda had some references in her slides. And Magda, if you get a chance, could you post to the chat group the reference for the article that you cited, looking at divergent decisions and how public
Sure.
assessment reports, and that we can post it, Zach can post it to the overall comments there. Great. So let's continue this. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our final guest, Ms. Priti Shah. Priti is the Executive Director, International Regulatory Affairs at AstraZeneca. Priti leads AstraZeneca's International Regulatory Affairs Group. Most recently, she led the regulatory strategy to support equitable access to the COVID-19 vaccine. And this is impressive, securing 6 WHO EULs and 92 regulatory approvals worldwide, which have supported the use of the vaccine in over 170 countries. So this sort of regulatory success doesn't happen by chance, but it's a result of good planning and excellent communication. And today, Priti will share her experiences on the benefits of optimizing early agency industry communications. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Priti.
Thanks very much, Larry. And thank you, everyone. Delighted to be here today. And thank you for the opportunity to present. So thanks to FRP. So I was wondering, yeah, thank you. Bring my slides up. So I'm going to talk about optimizing early agency and industry communications with a focus on Reliance. And just to, as Larry, these are my opinions, and some of it are sort of ways of working that we have used within AstraZeneca, particularly for the vaccine. But really, the pandemic has accelerated our use of Reliance and collaborative review pathways. And we have changed and shifted the way we've worked with authorities around the world. And I'm going to share with you some of the ways we used, for the vaccine that worked, and proposals for the future. So how we can optimize the process even more. We know the world has got a lot smaller and lots of regulators are working together. But again, how do we optimize that communication and get the right documentation to the right authorities at the right time? So if I talk about the communication, really, we want to have a collaborative communication with the regulatory authorities end to end. So, right from clinical development to sort of life cycle management. And if I think about how we can communicate, there's three buckets that we can talk about. So we can use digitalization to help us. So one of the things that we would propose is that we have more submission predictability, and management of the submission processes end to end, that's visible and transparent to sponsors, to regulatory agencies, but that can be used as key performance indicators. So, practical examples could be, when are we going to get a question? So we as sponsors can make sure that we're resourced effectively to answer those questions at the right time. So that predictability is important for everyone, and really important for us to enable supply and to get products to patients as quickly as possible. I think Magda mentioned some of this is a collaborative digital environment. How can we share more information, be that public assessment reports or real-time data exchange, so questions and answers? How can we share that in a more optimized manner? And then early dialogue and knowledge sharing. So really, we're proposing to have meetings with the regulators at clinical development phase, to take them through the products, particularly as our products are getting more complicated, but throughout the submission phase with respective strategy, and post-submission as well. And then the other thing is the transparency around decision making. So we've just had a great presentation about assessment reports. One of the things that I think we can do as sponsors and industry is create an assessment aid that could help us standardize those assessment reports. So, it could be a tool that could be used to orientate the authority, but also, to review the critical points of the dossier to help write the assessment report. And that could include, an assessment of the product sameness. So what is different in the dossier versus a reference authority? Why is it different? Why is it important? And and should it be taken into account in the decision-making process? So, what we believe is that we should have early and continuous communication within the regulatory framework across all authorities. And, if I talk about the pandemic and the vaccine, we actually had, over 200 regulatory authority meetings with agencies all around the world. We supply to 170 markets. So, particularly with those countries that were Reliance markets. So what we're proposing is that we have the clinical development meeting earlier on. We then have a regulatory dossier orientation meeting, so where we're talking about what the dossier looks like, but also what the pathways we're using in reference countries are. And then a dossier review toolkit, so an assessment aid like process or a document that we would submit to the regulators that would help them understand the differences in the dossier between what we're submitting and the reference country, and that would also help in writing the assessment report. And then, underlying all of that, we would like some digital solutions to help us with submission predictability, key milestones in the review, so that we can resource effectively, but that it's transparent. Sorry, I'll move on to the next slide. So if I go into each one of those in a little bit more detail, the submission predictability is really important for us. So we think that, perhaps we can develop an online digital tool to share some of those, some of the key information between agencies. But what we would like to see is a live sort of agency. Where are we in the submission process? Has our dossier been picked up? Where is it in the assessment process? How's that going? But also some transparency around timelines of when how long reviews take. So that helps us, as I said, planning the end-to-end and finally getting product to patient, because sometimes if we don't understand that predictability, our supply chain's not quite ready. We can't, supply the right packs at the right time. The other thing that the pandemic showed us is, that with some agencies, we're still submitting in paper, and, we need to go digital. So we want an online portal that we can submit dossiers and other documentation, so we have that readily available in real time, and hopefully can share information in real time as well. This would help, agencies, but also industry, to look at the key performance indicators. How are we doing? How long does it take, in each country, and increase that predictability and transparency. In the future, we could move to real-time exchange via a cloud-based platform. But for now, we would like some predictability in the regulatory framework. Sorry, I'm going to try and move to the next slide. Okay, so then if I move on to the second sort of proposal, which was to have meetings or dialogue during the clinical development phase. So we think early engagement between the regulatory authorities and companies is really important to exchange information on the new products that we're registering, particularly as the science and technology is changing very quickly, and the new modalities and the science is much more complicated around endpoints, but also, cell therapy, gene therapy, and different modalities of product. These meetings we could also start to discuss the right regulatory strategy, to discuss reliance options, collaborative review, and whether we would work through some sort of collaborative review process with WHO or Project Orbis or Access. I think the other thing is that we can discuss the specific local applicability of the product as well, which helps prioritize how important that product is in that market. So the value is that, the regulators learn about the products earlier. We can build capability for the different stakeholders, increase the transparency of what's happening around the world, and the regulatory processes that we're thinking of using, but also increase the visibility of that early data availability. So then the second proposal was that we have these regulatory dossier orientation meetings. So during prior to our submission, what we would want to do is have early engagement with the regulatory authorities on the regulatory dossier content and its data. So what are we going to include in the file? Why is it important? Are there things missing? How important are the things that are missing? Can we justify why things are missing? What's the new technology, and what's the new regulatory scientific concepts, for example, digital endpoints? And this will give, the regulators sort of earlier information around what's in the dossier, what's missing, but also transparency on why things are different at potentially a regional level, but also with the reference authorities. It will also allow us to share our regulatory strategy in those reference countries, what we're doing, why we're going through certain pathways, and how important the product is. And as I said before, I think we can discuss the local impact of the product, so how it fits into the local healthcare ecosystem, what its priority is, and why we feel it's important. So again, this early dialogue with the regulatory agencies, means that we're partnering and working collaboratively together, but also it gives you earlier visibility of the risk-based review and understanding the differences in the dossier, which will promote reliance. So it will allow the regulators to focus on the bits that they really need to focus on that matter to them from a local perspective, which will increase capacity as well. It promotes sort of more collaborative work sharing approaches, and it can help us discuss post-approval strategies when the data is limited. And then I think the last option we had was, having an assessment aid-like template. So we know that the FDA has this concept. We know Brazil has introduced something similar, where we will sort of document the different aspects of the product development across, the quality clinical data and the non-clinical data. This assessment aid, helps with the submission to orientate the reviewers to the key parts of this. But also it explains, in detail, around the product and dossier sameness. So, why do we consider that they're the same product? Why do we think that Reliance is the right mechanism, and the rationale for that? So this is, again, something that's used within some of the Access Consortium. But also I think what it would help to do is standardize the assessment reports that we were talking about earlier, if we had an assessment aid like template. So what we believe the value of this is that it would enable an efficient and agile product review, so focusing on the right things at the right time, and those things that really enable a risk-based review, so that we're not re-looking at the whole dossier. It gives us some standardization around the product sameness, and the differences between that and the reference market, if there are any. And it's an important and transparent tool. So hopefully in the end, what it would do is it would achieve efficiency and time and capacity, and eliminate duplication for the agencies and sponsors. We believe that the assessment reports are really important. I think we've talked about how it's important for industry and agencies, from a Reliance perspective, but actually what the vaccine showed us is patients actually want to know more. So it's really important that the decision-making process that an agency has used is transparent to a patient, and how those reviews were made. And we all saw all of the media with the vaccine. Patients want to know more and have access to that information, and how those decisions are made is really important. So thank you very much. I think that was my last slide. Ooh, was that my last slide? Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, that was great, Priti. That was just chock full of information. Just as a little point of clarification, you had a wonderful experience, of interacting with 100+ agencies around the world. So obviously, they range from very highly mature, sophisticated agencies to those that are maturing agencies. And when you talk about these different steps of communication, what did you find happened when you started interacting with the smaller, less well-resourced agencies? How did they accommodate your interactions? Were they open to it? Did they say, geez, I'd rather do it by phone? Or how did you accommodate those kinds of interactions? Because I think we're all pretty clear about how you can formally go to FDA or to EMA. But what about the rest of the world? What happened there?
So we had a really good experience with a lot of the authorities. Obviously, the vaccine was a special case where, everybody wanted access to supply. So this was important to everybody. And so we talked with authorities, virtually, because most of us were in lockdown. So the meetings were all virtual. But we had regular communications with multiple authorities, around the development program, but also around the data deficiencies and why we thought, why we felt we had a scientific sort of robust justification to support the I won't say deficiencies, but we had accelerated development, so we didn't have the same amount of data that you would ordinarily experience with respect to stability and process validation, even clinical trials. We were doing rolling reviews. So because we were doing rolling reviews, and because of the sort of because of the accelerated development, we felt it was really important to be very transparent with the authorities. And so we took them through what we were going to submit, how we were going to submit it, when we were going to submit it, and actually what the other authorities had told us about how they were assessing that. So, we had advice from EMA and Health Canada and WHO, etc. And we shared all of that. And I think the biggest thing that built for us was a lot of trust. They knew exactly what was happening, where it was happening, when it was happening. And to be honest, we had to do that because the media knew, sometimes ahead of us what was going on. So what I think it's changed our perspective on how we communicate with some of those agencies that ordinarily we would never have communicated with. So we think there's a real benefit in doing that, and it's a real partnership. But I think that trust is really important, and that transparency, because whether we like it or not, everything is shared and everything is out there. The world is a much smaller place, and we need to sort of embrace that.
Well, no, I appreciate those learnings. Why don't we bring everybody together again? And there have been a couple of common themes that have popped up across the comments, and I'll just start with one of them, and this has to do with something that Magda brought up, and maybe Asmaa, you might give us some reflections on your ideas around this, and this has to do with this concept of redacted versus unredacted assessment reports. And we joke about this, that back in the old days, when I first got involved, a redacted report, and to some extent today too, is a report that has magic marker blocked out, and that's really kind of what we thought about redacted. But we know today too that if you look at a very nicely formatted, clean report, it may have been redacted. In other words, not everything that was in the original submission was in this public assessment report. So there was an a priori redaction. So from a regulator standpoint, how do you approach an assessment report? How do you say to your staff and to others, look, we have access to these things. These are the pros and these are the cons.
Yes, well, before I would like to thank Magda and thank Priti very, very much for this presentation and the ideas and the approaches for Reliance from the two perspectives, from the CRS and from the industry. For your question about the difference or between the redacted and the unredacted reports during the past 2 years of piloting and actual practice of Reliance, there are some differences between the two reports, away from the confidential and commercial data in the unredacted reports that of course are hidden, and the names of the assessors and so on. But there's still some differences that make it's about confidence of the reviewers more than the quantity of the difference in data. That's frankly speaking. We are more confident when we have a full or unredacted assessment report from the authority. We are in a very beginning phase of a proper Reliance practice. So we have to build that confidence and that trust. And then we can move to another area and how we can use the public assessment report along with other tools for Reliance that are much more matching this the current situation. Like for example, the joint assessment initiatives from the ICMRA and from the PQKMS. I don't know if you know about them, the two pilot initiatives that we are going to be engaged in. They will build more trust and they will build more capacity even than this difference, that difference in data we can monitor in the unredacted or the full assessment report against the public assessment report. So we are moving and everything changes. And I believe in 1 year or in 2 years from now, we will be having a new version of our regulations using other tools than the unredacted or the full assessment report.
Interesting.
I believe also, yes, I believe also the being among the authorities in the ICH and the IPRB, we are, by the way, we have participated in the IPRB document on the Reliance question and answer with the WHO and the discussion group in the IPRB. So we are moving toward new tools for Reliance. We will not stay in the same square of the unredacted and the question and answer documents. We are trying to have the benefits from such tools these days, but tomorrow will be, of course, different. And the end-to-end engagement, like Priti said, is very, very promising idea. And the joint assessment also is another tool. So there is a difference. The
That's
difference
great.
is,
Yeah.
yes, the difference is not significant difference, but we need it for the beginning of the Reliance.
Interesting. So Priti, could you reflect on that? Because you may have seen in your conversations that there's this kind of evolution of the way people are looking at data, and maybe they've given you some insights as to what they would see the future to look like, what other agencies, let's say, or other stakeholders might see the future of these kinds of assessment reports and shared documents might look like. What do you think?
So I suppose the lack of standardization of the assessment reports, I think, is an issue. So the timeframes and the differences, between agencies, because I think if you're going to adopt Reliance, we want to be able to use, any sort of reference country, as it were, and if we have to explain a different reference or authority at a different time, it becomes difficult. I mean, for the vaccine, we had regional supply chains. So we were using reference countries that we'd never used before. And actually, some of those countries didn't even have an assessment report. So, we were sort of encouraging that communication to happen. I sort of agree with Asmaa is, I think it becomes a trust issue. So the redaction and why you redact has to be made clear, and what you've redacted has to be made clear to the accepting agency. I think because people don't understand enough about the review processes in different agencies, that education needs to be there. And so from our perspective, I think we would share, as long as there is an understanding from the accepting agencies that, actually, we might not be submitting the same level of data, because we want to make sure that we have an optimized life cycle management process. And so, what we submit to FDA, we might not submit to Egypt, because we need to have the variation procedures in place that do that. So I think it's a two-way thing. There's a trust or an understanding of why assessment reports are being redacted, but also there needs to be an understanding with the accepting authority that we might not always submit the same information. But that's not because we're hiding anything. That's just because we want to manage the process in an optimal way. So I think we need to educate both ways, I think, and we need to do it together in partnership. So I think
yeah, absolutely. That's I think that's the theme for today, is communication and partnership, and using that as a element of Reliance. So we have a minute left. So why don't I just give you each 1 minute just to kind of reflect on a topic which has to do with the benefits of Reliance. And one of our folks in the audience said, you know, we know that Reliance is helping with access. That's great. And what are other ways that Reliance can help us just in general? And you've all touched on this a little bit, but just if you each take 1 minute just to reflect on where you see Reliance evolving into. And why don't I start with Priti, and then we'll go to Magda and finish with Asmaa.
So I think from a Reliance perspective, I think it helps build the capability in authorities. So I think, you know, understanding how other reference agencies have reviewed certain pieces of information helps to build a capability, particularly around new science. But I think that capability is really important because we want, you know, countries have generic products, they have local products that are not always registered in a reference market. So they need to be able to have that independent review capability. And I think Reliance helps build that. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about that. Being able to focus on what's locally important is really brilliant. Magda.
Oh, thank you, Larry. Great presentations, just to say, from Priti also and Asmaa. But I think for me, Reliance will be really a key tool for all agencies around the world, not just those that perhaps are seen as less resourced. I think we're even hearing that those agencies that have a lot of resource are struggling. So I think this will become a really important tool for agencies to be able to work together, to learn from each other, to ultimately be able to focus on those areas that are seen as key in their local populations. So what you've alluded to, Larry, and I think this could ultimately, as I've said, help enable not only national approval in the agencies, but also regional and global approval that could be faster. So thank you for that.
Very good. And Asmaa, final word.
Yes, final word. So Reliance, from our perspective, is an excellent tool for the best use of resources. In a world full of resource constraints, economic constraints. So it is an excellent way and a smart way for best use of resources and best reallocation of resources towards we all agree, as our local manufacturer and our domestic manufacturers. So it's all about resources and the best use of them.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. Mario, any last
Well, yeah, I know we don't have time. It has been a great session. I mean, this has been the fourth, and a continued interest, and looking forward to see everyone in September, because these discussions have to continue. Larry?
Thanks. And great. And just to remind everybody, our next webinar will be held in September, when we'll be investigating 3 easy ways to overcome resistance to the use of Reliance. This will be addressed from both the company and agency points of view. We'll be talking about empowering reviewers to make a fully informed Reliance decision, ensuring an aligned objective approach within the company for the use of Reliance. You know, not everybody's on board always, you know, with using Reliance, and then promoting communications between the agency and the company to ensure that those submissions meet expectations. And it's kind of a building on the themes that Priti gave us today. So we'll be sending details to you in the near future, or you'll be able to register soon at the FRPath.org website, where you can find more information about Reliance and other facilitated regulatory pathways and archives of all of our webinars. So once more, Mario and I would like to extend a very special thank you to our guests, Asmaa, Magda, and Priti. This was a wonderful session, chock full of practical information. Zach, do you have a slide there with regard to some of our findings, our conclusions? We have some good takeaways. I think that Reliance is a capacity building tool, and that it has to be tailored. So if you're going to use it, be sure you know what kind of Reliance pathway you're using. That regulatory convergence and harmonization are really important. We've heard that from all of our speakers, that we need to have more alignment, especially around things like PARs, so that the PARs are useful tools for agencies, but there's still opportunities, and as we'll see in the next bullet, that if the reference agencies, PARs are still not yet designed to address reliance, so that we need to have a greater effort around that, and regular and early conversations with authorities during development and assessing the filing strategy and dossier orientation are very beneficial. They do take time, but in the end, they're very, very helpful. So with that, I want to thank you all for your interest and participation, and all our best until we meet again. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you all.